Welcome to this special episode of the Etsy Conversations podcast. And this is actually something new I'm doing. This is the convome.com audio blog series. And I just want to introduce you to this new concept of what I want to do. And I would love to get your feedback on this. Let me know if it's something that you like, something that you want more of, or something I shouldn't bother wasting my time with. So if you're listening to this podcast episode and you've listened to more than just this episode, then I consider you my core person. And what I mean by that is that you're my people. And one thing I've learned about you over the years doing this podcast is that you prefer to listen rather than to read the information that I provide. And that's great because I like to talk and I like to do this podcast. So I'm doing something new and different. I've started to write more on the blog over at convome.com. And there are some posts that I think provide some really good information for you. Lots of them are Q&A style, from questions I get or questions I see within the community and want to answer in more detail. But since I know that you prefer to hear me talk than to read the posts I write, and I know this just from looking at the numbers and comparing the stats between podcast downloads versus website visits. So I can see to some degree how many downloads of the podcast episodes I get, which is, how many people listen to the podcast episodes. And I can also see how much traffic the website is getting. And in addition to looking at those numbers, some of you have actually told me directly that you actually just prefer listening to the podcast and digesting or ingesting the information that way because you can multitask, you can work and you can make and you can do other things while you're listening. And that's great. That's the convenience of it. So I'm doing something new and it's this audio blog. And it will be just me recording podcasts of the blog posts that I've written. And I would really like it if you let me know if you like this or not, and whether or not it's something that you would like me to do more of. I'm going to put out some, the first few episodes, and hopefully I'll hear back from you one way or another. I'm not going to stop doing the interviews with Etsy sellers for sure. That's the core of this podcast. It's Etsy Conversations. So those conversations will continue. They're not going to be replaced. They're not going anywhere. This audio blog is just additional content for you. Now, if you want to go ahead and go to convome.com and read the blog posts yourself, that's great. You're welcome to do that. But I'll be giving you the same info here, minus any links and whatnot that I can put in a post that I can't put into an audio file, just so you know what's going on over there at the blog. This is what this is for. Now, this week will be the first audio blog, which is one I wrote a couple of weeks ago, and it answers the question, how much does the average person make on Etsy? Like I said, these are questions that come up in the community, and sometimes I get asked. And so if you have any questions or topics that you'd like me to write about and then make the audio blog of, definitely you can email me at interview@convome.com, or you can connect with me on Instagram at convomepodcast and send me a DM and let me know. Or you can use the contact form on convome.com to do the same thing. Now, in upcoming episodes, I'll be reading my other blog posts as well, including the one about how you can get access to Creative Bug absolutely free. Creative Bug is the competitor online crafting class website to what used to be known as Craftsy, but is now known as Blueprint. And so there's a way that you can get access to all their classes 100% free of charge. And it's not just on a trial basis, and it's not temporarily, but it's the real deal. And so I wrote a blog post about how you can do that, and it's over on convome.com. That audio blog is going to come out in a couple of weeks. But of course, if you can't wait for that episode to be released, because I'll be doing these once a week, you can always just go over to convome.com and read the blog post now. The blog posts will always come out before the audio blog, because I have to write them first. And so this week, the topic is an answer to the question, how much does the average person on Etsy, how much does the average person make on Etsy? So first off, there is no average person that defines your typical Etsy seller. And that's because people who sell on Etsy, they run the gamut. And you can get a sense of this just based on the array of guests that I've hosted on the Etsy Conversations podcast. My guests have ranged from solo business owners to married couples, to students, to hobbyists, from trained artisans to self-taught makers to experts in vintage and antique items. So with that wide range of interests and skills, it's not easy to pinpoint who or what is average. But there are some stats that I've drawn from this spectrum of sellers. And you might notice that on the podcast, I don't ask people directly what they make on Etsy. I will ask sometimes if their shop is profitable, or if they're running it as a business or as a hobby, or, if they're making a full-time living from it, just because I just don't. Now, some people have felt comfortable sharing their actual income with me off the air, and I just think it's kind of private. And so I don't share that on the podcast, whether or not someone is comfortable with it. And that's just me, I guess, talking about, that's just a me thing. I know other people do it, and sometimes people like to hear, solid numbers, as they call it, but I just never have really gone down that road. However, I did poll my podcast audience some time ago so that I could better determine what kind of content and information they wanted. But one of the questions I asked was how much they were earning on Etsy on average per month. And the poll was anonymous because I wanted people to feel comfortable answering honestly. And I felt like I would get more responses if people didn't feel like they knew I knew who they were telling me how much they were making. And so I did ask this question, and pretty much everyone across the board answered that particular question. Well, all the other questions too. And earnings ranged from about $500 per month on the low end to over $10,000 per month. And this is US dollars. Some sellers were outside of the US. And so I just assumed that they did a rough currency exchange and then selected, said what price range, what income range they were in. The majority of sellers that responded earned between $1,000 and $5,000 US dollars per month. And, just so you're aware, this poll was taken from people who listen to my podcast. Not every single Etsy seller, because I'm sure not every seller listens to my podcast. So I'm sure that there are some sellers who don't listen to my podcast that could possibly fall outside this range on both ends of the spectrum. So again, this is just people who listened to my podcast and did the survey. Now, regarding earning a living wage from selling on Etsy, for anyone considering selling on Etsy and wondering if the income they earn will be worth their while, I can say definitively that your income from selling on Etsy will be commensurate to the time and effort you put into following a number of things. One of them is creating a quality product or line of products that stand out from the crowd. And it's a very loud, crowded crowd on Etsy in pretty much every niche. So you need to be ready to stand out. And that doesn't just go for people who actually make, but people like me who sell supplies and vintage items as well. So, So that's the first thing, is it has to be something of quality that will stand out in some way from everything else that's on there. Learning how to sell successfully on Etsy is key also, because winging it will only get you so far for so long. I know when I started off on Etsy, I was winging it. If you listen to the podcast, many other sellers started off too just by winging it. But eventually, when you start to get some traction, you're going to have to sit up and start doing things in a more organized way, and in a way that will guarantee that you actually succeed on the platform. The Etsy Seller Handbook and the Help Center are two great starting points, and they're both completely free. I'll throw in here, and this is not on the blog post, that this year I will be doing online workshops and in-person workshops, and this is in collaboration with working with Etsy U, which is a kind of a train the trainer, where Etsy will be training me and some other sellers too, not just myself. And we get access to training that's not publicly available, and things that aren't, out there, to help, teach you how to sell better on Etsy. And I did a whole other episode about this, where I went into detail, in another podcast episode, detail about the different topics that we'll be touching on. And as of the time I'm recording this, we're actually covering social media for Etsy sellers. And so I'm kind of excited about that. And if you want to learn more about those, just go to convome.com/workshops, or sign up to my mailing list. And those are the people who will hear when my workshops are going to be happening. You'll hear them first. Okay, back to earning a living wage from selling on Etsy. The other thing that you have to put time and effort to is constantly working on your shop. And that includes doing things like testing and tweaking your tags and your titles, zigging and zagging when Etsy zigs and zags. And that's not a bad thing. It's called adaptability, and you have to adapt to changes that happen on the platform. And they're not for no reason. And so even though you might hear a lot of, kickback and negative feedback about changes on the platform, there usually is a reason. And you'll hear from talking to some of the guests that I have on the podcast, how some of the changes Etsy has made has actually helped improve their businesses and increase their sales. And so it's not always... Actually, I don't think it's that Etsy is out to get anybody, but that's another topic for another day. All right. Another thing you have to focus on is picking a marketing strategy for your shop. And I said a marketing strategy, not multiple marketing strategies, but focusing in on one and getting really good at it, at least before you move on to another one. So this could be social media marketing. Again, I'm really excited about learning about social media for Etsy shops, and I will let you know when I'm going to do that workshop. And if you just can't wait for it, email me and tell me I'm wasting time getting it out there, and I will work faster to let you know when the date for that particular workshop I will be offering is. All right, so it could be social media marketing. So you can pick one platform, maybe two, but preferably one platform to own and dominate on and really learn. Blogging is another great marketing strategy. I have an episode coming up with Kate of Bolt and Rally, and she uses blogging as a marketing strategy, and it's working for her. And you'll hear us talk about that. And that episode airs sometime in June. And finally, you want to filter out the voices in your head, and that includes my voice as well. Pick one or two people to trust as your go-to sources for information about selling on Etsy, and stop chasing after every wind of Etsy selling doctrine, because there's a lot of information out there. And I'm not saying that it's, there's anything wrong with that, but you could get really tied up in consuming information and never actually doing anything with it. So if you don't just narrow down who you listen to, where you get the information and then you act on it, you will drive yourself crazy, probably just trying to do everything that everyone with an opinion tells you to do. All right, so that's it for this episode. Stay tuned for my next post in the Etsy Q&A series. I don't know what to call these. No, this is going to be my audio blog series. If you have a question that you don't yet see answered, or you would like me to respond to, feel free to leave it in the comments on this blog post at convome.com, and just look for how much does the average person on Etsy make. And also, if you go to convome.com, you will find links to everything else, the workshops, podcast episodes, the contact page, all that. Thank you for listening, and I will be back with the next audio blog next week. Well, not next week, but next time. You'll see it if you're subscribed to the podcast.